Hi, welcome back. I'm here again with Dr. John Frank, and in this lesson, we're going to talk about developing a major gift strategic plan. John, maybe you could start off on the first slide there. Now, one of the challenges with our students is they come from a wide range of organizations on how sophisticated are they and how mature are they in terms of fundraising. It's fine to be wherever you are, but how you're going to approach your plan is going to be a little different depending on what stage you're in. So if you're stage one, no newsletter, no donor tracking system, and your individual donators are mainly friends and family of staff with no mechanisms to add new donors, you have minimal board contributions and assistance in fundraising, you need to put those things into place before you really move on to major donors, because otherwise you're not really ready for that, unless you just happen to have one or two major donors, and then you just apply these principles. Now, the second stage is where it's usually an organization less than $1 million. Fundraising is primarily done by the executive director. You'll have a newsletter, you'll have core donors, you might have limited mechanisms to add new donors. Usually these organizations don't have a major donor strategy, may or may not have a donor management system, and board members can contribute, but board provides some assistance in fundraising. And here having some major donor strategy could be helpful. So I know, John, you've probably worked with organizations stage 2, 3, and 4, and usually if you're in stage 1, you're not hiring consultants, but a lot of organizations will have a full-time development director, but they don't have major donor officers. And they might have a major donor strategy with a donor management system. But stage 4, and maybe, John, you could talk about what some of the ranges of organizations you've seen and how they've related to major donors, because you've been in some organizations. What's the largest organization, like how many major gifts officers did they have that you've worked with?
Well, it was a major Midwest Christian college,
Mm-hmm.
and they had a full-time plan giving department with attorneys, and they had so many prospects of people that wanted to talk to them that they only talked to the A-level prospects, and they had B-level prospects that they couldn't even get to in plan giving. So that was
Okay.
the largest.
Yeah, and probably a lot of the other, you've worked with organizations that will have like a whole development department with multiple major donor officers, major gifts officers, and then you have, let's say you're in a, I don't know, $1 to $5 million organization, and you have a development director and you have an executive director. How often would you be seeing the executive director meeting with major donors versus the development director? And how would you think about, how do you split that, and at what dollar value are they meeting with them? How do you think through that type of strategy?
Yeah, stage 2 is really a transition strategy. You're doing better than one, but you're really not. You don't have any rhythm to anything, any system. So the 1 to 5 million, I would say, is in the stage 3. They have a full-time director of development, and now if you look at the donor pyramid, the director of development may have started with the lower end of direct mail, but now they've hired people under them to do the direct mail, to do the special events, and their time should be spent on major donors and plan giving. Now you say, okay, what do they do? Well, some of the things they do is create a lunch, and they take the executive director to meet a major donor who's currently a major donor, okay, just to introduce them. This is what we do with our major donors. There could be the same with plan giving. Now, the one thing that is a stage 3 to stage 4 issue is, what if you're doing a capital campaign? What if you're running a $5 million annual fund? Do you have any time as director of development to do plan giving? My answer was no. So I hired a plan giving consultant. Now, why do I bring that up here? Not to just talk about consulting. Plan giving is high expertise, high change, high complexity. And so I felt that as director of development, running a campaign, running a development department, and all these things, and going to see major donors, I couldn't keep up with the changes. I needed someone that knew the plan giving legal aspect, et cetera, and how to do what's the difference between a charitable remainder trust and estate planning, this and that, and this individual. So many of the stage 3 and sometimes stage 4 will use a plan giving consultant, someone who that's all they do full time. They'll come in for maybe 1 week a month and visit the contacts. And my consultant took me with him. And I went with him on a call one time where this couple had lived in this house their whole lives, raised their family, and they were retiring and giving the entire house to the mission. And I'll just tell you this story because it was a light bulb for me. My consultant was a friend of mine. And as I was talking to this couple and saying goodbye, I said, you haven't just given us your house, you've given us your home, because of all the life that was in it and the pictures and the history. And then on the way back, my plan giving consultant turned to me and says, well, you finally get it. You finally get it. They're giving their home, not just a house. So you learn from these specialists. So I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think so. I mean, I think the main point and the reason why I wanted to start the planning presentation on this is you have to start your plan with where you are.
Yeah.
And then you're gonna, so if you're at stage 2, if you're at stage 1, it's going to be hard to do a major donor plan. So you need to pretend you're at stage 2.
Well, let me just
you're at stage 2, do the basics, but then try to move into assuming you're in stage 3. So do a plan that assumes that you get to be larger. I think, there is a stage 5. We're not even listing here that where you bring plan giving internal. My read is a lot of times that's organizations that are 50 million plus if the entire plan giving process is internal, because that means you're paying full-time lawyers, often full-time accountants.
Yep.
It's extremely complex, and the risk on those things is huge. So if you get someone who doesn't know what they're doing, you could have front page news that you stole money from a grandma. And that's not going to look good. So
let me add one thing to stage 1 and stage 2. Much of your major donor calls will be reactionary in nature. In other words, someone will hear about your organization and they'll call you. Could I take you to lunch? I'm coming to your banquet. And that's what you have time for. Because in stage 1, you're also doing the front lines ministry, most likely. Stage 2, you're going to get some contact with people, and that'll birth other contacts with other people.
Yeah. Okay, great. So based on that framework, why don't you jump into how you approach planning and thinking through resources and org chart for development.
Oh, okay. Is this one mine?
Yeah. So this is development.
Okay.
This would be for probably, a stage 4 organization, right? So for a larger organization.
Possibly three. Because now, first of all, their director of development, probably 4. Okay, what I do is I call development assistants at the bottom. They are support systems. Development associates have responsibility for donors, for their tasks, and if you have need of an associate director of development, they're mainly helping all the other people stay in process. Management is tasks and stuff. Up at the top, the board is to be working on oversight. And and then the development subcommittee, what I teach, it's not necessarily a popular teaching, I will say, from my years of working with boards. They're not always teachable, shall I say. But the idea of the development committee is to bring in new stewardship prospects. In other words, the board is not to run the organization. The board is not to manage the organization. But the development committee can assist the board in introducing new leaders in the donor world and in the community to the director of development or the CEO. So you see now, the executive director on the right is leadership and managing the director of development. And then look what the third one is: specific tasks with major donors. All right, when I was working with a large organization, like I said, I had about 100, 150, 125 donors assigned to me. Well, the president of this ministry they could only manage maybe 25 to 50. You know, they have a lot of other responsibilities. So you look at, you know, but the director of development of major donors, because the whole team down here has responsibilities that in a stage 2 or stage 3 organization, the director of development would be doing all the work of the development associates, the lower half of the donor pyramid, if you will. So the director of development is totally focused on major donors and plan giving, which to me, plan giving are major donors. Okay. So as you look at it, the donor pyramid staffing wise starts at the bottom, and the director of development, the executive director, and the board works more and more towards the top of the donor pyramid with their responsibilities. Does that help? Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. And John, let me just add, you know, one of the bits of advice that I've heard on startups, there's a book called The E-Myth and The E-Myth Revisited. And his big point was, whenever you create a startup and you're small, you need to write it. So even if there's, you know, you look at this, there's like, I don't know, whatever, 8 or 10 job descriptions that could be on this org chart. If you're doing all these things, say you're in a stage 2 organization and you're doing all these things, you have no director of development, you need to write the job descriptions and start to write the procedures as if you're going to have all these positions. Because if you write out the procedures, then once you get a director of development, first of all, you're going to know what they do. Second, you're going to be able to hand, you know, the example that he uses, he says you're wearing 10 hats. You're going to be able to hand, you know, 5 of those hats to that person. And so, you know, part
If
of
they're
what you should be
income
doing,
producing.
yeah. So, what, you know, this could be a diagram for how you organize your, you know, development procedures manual. And then what that's going to do is that's going to make it easier for, you know, if you write a job description for a major gifts officer, then you'll already have those procedures. So
That's a very
okay,
good
so
point. And I'd like to add one thing to it real quickly. When I first started consulting, I offered as a product a development audit. My years of experience had allowed me and working at the mission to be able to see things very quickly. So I started doing a lot of them. And it had, what was my overall observation? What were my three or 4 or 5 basic observations? And then I wrote my recommendations. And my recommendations were specific in leadership, management, and development. Now, when I get finished doing this, whether it was a stage 1, stage 2, or stage 3, sometimes a stage 4, but almost all of them would say, John, these are right on the recommendations. Can we do these ourselves? Now, before you say, gee, as a consultant, if you're writing an audit report so that you just get hired, that's unethical. So I was very clear to say to them the following: you can do these, but it's going to take you about 3 to 5 years. If you hire me, we can do this in 1.5 to 2 years. So I gave them both sides of it, so it didn't look like I was manipulating. But the point is that you made of looking to the future and saying, what can we be and how do we get there? Can we get there ourselves, or do we need assistance? And having job descriptions or having someone audit your development department can move you down the path faster.
yeah, that's great. Okay, John, you can go ahead and jump to the next slide if you'd like.
All right, now this is my simple little form on how I get 100% board involvement in development. First of all, you cannot do one size fits all, just like with all other relationships. You know, there was one client where their annual dinner, they asked every board member to give $100. Well, that's fine, but some board members, that may have been a stretch. For others, they could have done 1,000. So anyway, as you go down the list, the first thing you ask them, are they going to pray for the ministry? You know, I'm serious about that. I don't say yes unless it's yes. Are they going to give a single gift? Are they going to become a monthly partner? Are they going to host a table at an event? Are they going to be a business sponsorship? Now we get down to the more advanced thinking. Would a board member ever refer a major donor to you? Would they assist in the research and rating? Remember the yellow topped form where you said how much could they give, and what board members might know them. Oh, I play golf with them, They might go on a donor call. They might introduce a business leader or a pastor, and maybe there's something else. So you bring this out every January, and you let the board members make their commitments individually. And you can say that 100, and you can say this to foundations and other donors. How many of your board members are donors? And it's terrible when you have to say, oh, about half, or all but one, those kinds of things. Major donors, if they ask the question about what the board gives, you need to have something like this in your arsenal. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, great. So just to tie this in with the class, so one of the items we're going to have the students do is to create a major gifts and annual giving organization and resource allocation plan. And, part of that's going to be thinking through who are all the players, who's going to do what, how much money is needed, what's the role of the board. So this slide can be helpful to thinking through, okay, what's going to be the role of your board. But, it seems to me probably the number one thing for a lot of boards that the boards do in major gifts is if you have board members who can do introductions to other people. And the other thing that I hear is, having a board member do the ask can be much more effective sometimes, especially if there's some sort of, relationship, or, sometimes you get extremely prominent people in the community. So if it's someone who's known throughout the city, a sports player or the head of a bank or something like that, and if that person's doing the ask, that's going to be a lot more attractive, and it seems less self-serving for things like that. So
Yep.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, great. You can jump to the next slide.
Okay. Here's my table of gifts. I should have, I think, put it earlier, but if you recall where I say the 3 types of ask, this is where it was. If you were asking someone to be the lead donor to the capital campaign, there's very few people in a community that can do that. So when I show someone how to do a campaign, there's 3 phases. There's the preparation phase, there's the silent leadership, quiet leadership phase, and then there's the public phase. Well, the preparation phase is usually 6 to 12 months. The quiet leadership phase to talk to these people can be 6 to 12 months, and the public phase is 6 months. So when you actually show that it can take a long time to recruit a steering committee, to do your donor prospecting, to get your internal organization ready, and then how do we get ready to talk to a major donor about a $150,000 gift? I know of some campaigns, it can take them 3 months just to find someone who knows someone who works with someone. It's that kind of relationship thing. And then you'll notice if you say 25,000 and above, that's the leadership gifts. Would you perfectly consider being one of our leadership gifts? And then, of course, just using the whole table and say, just pray where you see it fits you. And again, people that can give, generally, you're looking at $3,000 and above are the ones you're going to talk to individually. Okay, but when you get to the 18 and 50, and you talk about prospects, some in the top 4 gifts there, you might need 2 prospects for every ask. Why do I say that? Because you don't go calling on major donor prospects and say, oh, I'm going to knock on 10 doors and hope that I get 1 gift. Now, you might do that for $500, but you don't do that. Again, you're targeted, you're one-on-one. So in prospecting, you might need 1 or 2 or maybe 3 for the top 25,000 above. So if you take 4, 7, 11, 11 times 2 is 22. Another is 33. So 33 prospects for those top 11 gifts. Whereas the bottom half, you might be looking at a couple thousand prospects. Okay. So
Yeah.
again, using the table of gifts to help you plan, using it to reach your goal. This is how major donors are used to seeing your plan. And if you don't have a table of gifts as part of the case for support, that's where it is, and your marketing piece. If you don't have it, I did a campaign, worked with a board that said, you're ready. You went to a 3-day seminar. They sent me to a 3-day seminar. I came back and they sent me with this board member, another one, to this owner of a huge mall in the city I lived. And he had his kids at our school and went to him. And we made our presentation. He said, you guys need to go back and learn. You don't have any clue what you're doing about a capital campaign. I mean, he was firm businessman, but he put that board member in his place for even, trying to come and present to me when we weren't prepared.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's important. So I think part of the idea is just how and this could be capital campaign. It could be, how are you going to reach your major donor goal if you're going to have $1
yep,
million,
yep,
but often
yep,
having this type of strategy can be useful.
yep.
So, okay, you can jump to the next slide if you like.
All right. Now this is a report of how all of your donor relationships work. All right. It's a goals template. Okay. It's after the fact. And there's 2 ways to measure: number of gifts and gift amounts. So as we look at major gifts only for now, how many gifts did we receive this month? What about last year, the same month? Because again, times of the year matter to major donors. Some may give you quarterly based on their dividends. Some may wait till November, December. And then this year to date, we've had 15. Last year to date, we had 10. Then you look at the dollar amounts and do the same type of thing. And you can look then against the budget or the projections and say, well, what did we hope to do? Where are we? And some of the things you use simply is you say, okay, we had more gifts this month, but let's say the dollar amounts were, well, no, I'm going to use this one because it happened a lot in 2008 and 2009. We had less number of gifts with major donors, but we had more dollar amounts, higher dollar amounts. What is the conclusion we draw from that? Well, the conclusion is we had less donors. The economy went down in 2008. The number of major donors, maybe, and some contacted us, weren't able to give at the level. But with what's up then with the dollar amount increase? It's the faithful donors knew what was going on in the economy, and they boosted their giving. That's what we learned. The second thing we learned is some of the people that didn't give this year versus last year had difficulties in their life. They lost their businesses. They couldn't give as much. And so it gives you a ministry opportunity to contact them and say, you've been generous in the past, and I'm not calling for a gift, but I'm just calling to see, are you okay? Are you and your family okay? And so that's what this type of report does. It helps you look at this year and last year, both in number of gifts and dollar amounts.
Okay, great.
Okay,
You want to jump to the
onward.
next slide? Yep.
All right, now this again, down the left column, I'm going to go back a slide, should be the same as the left column on this report. Okay, it isn't, but just pretend it is. So here are all your strategies down the left side. And then you have your calendar in the front. This is not a goals projection. This is a when do we do what calendar. All right. Now we don't have filled in, but in the bottom is plan giving. That might be when you plan to do an event or a Wills kit or whatever. New donor things, activities, impulse donors. When are we sending out appeals? Well, this has it for January, March, May, and then September, October, November, December, the giving months. Well, let's look up at major donors. This is just a skeleton, probably a stage, going back to that slide, maybe a 3 or 4, maybe a 2, but more likely a 3 or 4 size organization. So in January, February, we're going to do thank yous. we're going to do thank yous because many major donors give in November, December, and get us to our year-end goals. Then March and April, I go with the annual fund presentation. Here's our goals, our financial goals, our ministry goals for the new year. Remember, vision is future. Now, down there under the executive director update, which is what I call it, is from the desk of the executive director. Again, I don't believe the director of development should be doing all the correspondence with major donors. This should be from the president or executive director. So 4 times a year from the letterhead of the executive director is a ministry update. And I do it on A6 letterhead, just a short 2 to 3 paragraph update. The other one is September through October is the top 100. We set goals to make a contact. And I use my top executives. I use board members. It could be an email. It could be a personal contact. It could be a proposal. What I do with board members, excuse me, I'm just getting too dry, is I give them a script. And Dr. Sears, if we don't have this, we can get this to you, I think, is I give them 3 to 5 donors. Now, in this case, major donors. Doesn't have to be, but in this case, it is. And here's a script. Hi, I'm John Frank. I'm on the board of the mission, and this is not a solicitation call. I'm just calling. You've been so faithful. First of all, thank you for your generosity. And I just want to ask you 2 quick questions. First, do you believe your gifts are being used wisely? Do you believe your gifts to the ministry are being used wisely? Then you wait to see if most of them are pleased. And just, the second question is, do you have any questions about what we're doing here at the mission or the ministry? And if I don't have the answer, I'll get the answer for you. That is a script I've been having board members do for 20 years. I've had board members resistant until they do it. And they come back and they say, they love us. Everybody loves us. They're thinking that when you call or contact a donor, they're going to hate you. They're going to hate you as a board member calling. Well, don't call at dinner time anyway. But the whole point is, as a board member, you have this huge clout. And to call an individual from a $5 million ministry and just ask those 2 questions is highly successful. So that's one for the board. The other ones are donor contacts that I've given you before. But that is a sample calendar of how to make and when to make contacts with major donors.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Well, one thing I'd like to add. So in the next session, we're going to be walking through the major donor plan that we do at the end of this course. We provided some templates that are similar to the ones that you have on these slides, John. But what I've done is I've taken out the parts that aren't major donors or planned giving and try to customize it to fit that better. But John, this has been really helpful. And thank you for your time in this. And we have one more session and then we should be all set. Thanks a lot.